Okay, well, good morning, everyone in Brazil. Good afternoon, everybody in the UK. First of all, our apologies for this slight delay in starting our webinar today. As we all know, there is a myriad of taxes in Brazil, which are charged by the federal government, the state, and the municipalities alike. And for decades now, there have been, and there still is, several tax reform initiatives in the Brazilian Congress with a view to achieving a more modern and efficient tax system. This theme is complex, and we are lucky to have with us today a specialist who will not only inform us on the status of the government's proposals in this area, but also give us their opinion in relation to the possible outcomes of what is being discussed. So in this respect, I committee of the Brazilian Chamber, especially its chairman, Gustavo Braga, founding partner of BBS Braga Bastos and Sá Advogados, and its vice chairman, Fábio Gaspar, tax director at Shell in Brazil, and Fábio, especially, who will conduct our works today. And I would like to thank them for their initiative and efforts in bringing to us a team of first-class panelists to guide us through the middles of this complex but fundamental theme. So to you both, and especially to all our speakers today, our sincere thanks for putting together this webinar and for sharing your knowledge with us. So finally, before we go ahead and before I ask Fábio to open our works today, I would like to remind you of a few housekeeping rules that are the following. First, I would like to ask you please to keep your cameras and the microphones off, and remind you that there will be a Q&A session today, and questions can be asked via the Teams chat box. So please feel free to type and send your questions to our speakers during the whole webinar. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording of the session will be posted at the Chamber's website and social media platforms in the next few days. So with that said, thanks very much to all, and over to you, Fábio.
Thank you very much, Lena. It's such a pleasure to be here, representing and on behalf of our tax committee in the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in the UK. I thank all the panelists here today. I echo Vera in the sense that this is a world-class, a star panel. So it's been a while since I've been around such good people. And I think what's more interesting than that is that it's people that will bring a very diverse set of points of view, which is very, very interesting when it comes to debating something so difficult, so complex, and that's being debated for so long. There's no easy answers. And the more we hear different perspectives and that we're open for other views, I think the more we'll evolve in these democratic debates. So I'm very excited to listen to the panelists here today. Again, a very starred panel, and one with very diverse points of view. I have a very difficult task of presenting the panelists today because their accomplishments and the way to introduce them, it's so long and lengthy and starred, as I said, that I couldn't memorize all their attributes. So I'll be reading a little bit of the bio from our panelists so that we provide proper context before listening to them and to exploring the wealth of perspectives that we'll be listening today. So we'll start with Giovanna. Giovanna Portolesi is a senior tax analyst at Receita Federal do Brasil, recently nominated for the OECD Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information Train the Trainer program. Giovanna obtained a PhD in European tax law from the University of Bologna and worked as a postdoctoral researcher in global tax governance at Leiden University. She's collaborating in the research project on cooperative compliance at the Global Tax Policy Center at the University of Vienna. She is passionate for the policy process behind the lawmaking in international taxation and is an enthusiastic learner of good governance principles in ESG and tax. I was fortunate to have met Giovanna not too long ago, and I think we exchanged a lot of similar views and ideas on how to come together with different perspectives to landing on something better than in an isolated way we would have done. Next, I'll present Ricardo Almeida, who has a master's degree in public law from the Rio de Janeiro State University. He's a member of the Permanent Forum on Tax Law of the Rio de Janeiro State Magistrature's Academy, a postgraduate tax law professor at UERJ, and also director at the Brazilian branch of the International Fiscal Association. He is a tax attorney of the city of Rio de Janeiro, a legal advisor to ABRASP, the Brazilian Association of Capital Cities Finance Secretariats, lawyer and a tax practitioner. Also, Ricardo is someone I've known for a couple of years now, and we share some passion, especially on the ESG space. I'll next introduce you to Danielle Loria. Danielle Loria is Director of the Secretariat of Tax Reform at the Ministry of Finance, professor and researcher of tax law at INSPER University, former tax partner of Stosch Forbes Advogados and PMA Advogados. Thank you, Danielle, for being here today. I'm eager to listen to you. And then finally, I'll introduce you to Guilherme Giglio. He is Deloitte's partner based in São Paulo with over 20 years of experience in tax advisory matters. He is often speaker in seminars and events and has published articles in Brazil and abroad relating to the tax reform proposals and other tax matters. Mr. Giglio graduated from Master's Law, LLM, tax at INSPER São Paulo with extension in international tax and trade law at Geneva University, and an undergraduate in law at University of Mackenzie in São Paulo. He's a member of the Brazilian Bar Association and served as a judge at the Administrative Court of São Paulo State for 3 mandates. He is the author of the book O IPI e o ICMS nas reorganizações societárias. And he was a professor at INSPER, also in São Paulo. Thank you, Guilherme, for being with us today. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Giovanna so that we kick off the wealth of discussions that we can expect for today.
Hello, good afternoon in the UK, good morning in Brazil. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Mr. Fabio Gaspar, for your invitation and for your kind introduction. It's a pleasure and an honor to me to share my thoughts with you today. I will share my presentation and hopefully it will work. And why it's not here? We leave everything open and then at some point it's not working. Let me try again. Sorry for this. Now it goes. Are you seeing it?
Yes, perfect.
Looks good, Giovanna.
Okay, looks good. Okay, so let's start. Well, I am Giovanna Portalesi. Fabio has already introduced me, as I work as a senior tax analyst at the Brazilian Federal Tax Administration, but I do not work in the teams dealing with tax reform. Today, I'm here in my personal capacity to express my views as a researcher of the tax reform process in Brazil. The agenda for today goes as reproduced in the slide. While you read, I would like to point out the level of importance of the tax reforms processes in Brazil. I will share with you my experience as a tax specialist. 25 years ago, when I graduated in law, taxation was a topic for experts. Nobody wanted to talk about taxation. If you want a conversation to stop, you would mention something on taxation, then people will go away and leave you speaking alone. Around 2012 and 2013, when the OECD G20 BEPS program was launched, in the middle of the economic crisis, the tax leaks scandals and the chase of companies as Google, Starbucks, and Apple, taxation became more popular and people started talking about taxation over the breakfast. It's a citation of Professor Jeffrey Owens. In 2023, taxation topics invaded our living room. Paying taxes is on the plot of the Oscar-winning movies Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Everybody is talking about taxation, even in Brazil. It's in this context that the Brazilian tax reform is taking shape and gained the media with a lot of different narratives. Let's start by defining what tax reforms in Brazil. As Vera presented in the very beginning, we have more than one tax reform going on in the country. The tax reform on consumption is more advanced, is the more advanced one. Sorry for the cat, I will put him away, sorry. And it's a comprehensive tax reform and implies a constitutional amendment to redistribute and to rebalance taxing powers among the three-level government entities in Brazil, the Federal Union, the member states, and the municipalities. The initial plan of the new government was to pass the consumption tax reform in the first semester of this year. I will explore this reform in depth in the next slides. The second reform in course is the reform on corporate tax and personal income taxes. The approach adopted by the current government is a piecemeal approach. The government is presenting provisional measures which have force of law within 90 days from its publication, but have to be confirmed by the parliament to become law. The new rules on transfer pricing were presented to the Parliament in the form of provisional measures and were recently adopted, fortunately. In the end of April, the government presented a provisional measure on a new CFC regime and also updating the thresholds for the taxation of individuals. I am much curious to have more information about the timing of this new provisional measure, since the government until mid-April was announcing a corporate tax reform for the second semester this year. The government was pointing to approve the tax consumption reform and then go to corporate and personal income taxes. Hopefully, my colleague will explore this change later on today. So, what are the special features of taxing powers in Brazil in a nutshell? We have a federation with three-level entities, which by design of the current constitutions have their own taxing powers. Taxing powers over consumption tax are split in 5 different taxes, which are distributed among the three-level governments. Tax on production and social contributions like PIS, COFINS, and IPI are attributed to the Federal Union. Tax on goods and special services like telecommunication and transportation are under the taxing power of member states. It's the ICMS. Municipalities having taxing powers over taxes on services. We are talking on a universe of 27 member states, so 27 different laws on ICMS, and more than 5,000 municipalities, which means not 5,000 laws, but something around that. So the convergence of these 5 taxes into VAT-like implies shifting of taxing powers from the member states and municipalities towards the federal union. Any resemblance which the tax lawmaking in the European Union, this is a question to reflect. So what are the proposals for constitutional amendment, the acronym PAC, in discussion in the parliament? We have 3 proposals, the PAC 45, the PAC 110, which were presented in 2019. And then we have PAC 45 and 110, supported by the government. PAC 45 was drafted in collaboration with the Center of Fiscal Citizenship, hosted by the Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo, which is coordinated by the current Special Secretary of Tax Reform, Mr. Bernard Api. PAC 45 was presented at the lower chamber of the parliament, while PAC 110 was presented before the Senate. What those proposals stand for? PAC 45 and 110 proposing the extinction of the current 5 taxes and the convergence for a single or a dual VAT. PAC 45 proposes a single tax called IBS on goods and services, plus an excise tax. Taxing rights of IBS will be shared among the 3 levels of government, each one establishing a uniform tax rate, which composition will reproduce the current level of taxation. Excise tax will be under the taxing powers of the federal union. PAC 110, on the other hand, split the taxing powers among IBS, tax on goods and services, and CBS, contributions on goods and services. IBS will be under the taxing powers of member states and municipalities, each one establishing a uniform rate, and the federal union will be competent over CBS and the excise tax. Both proposals preview a cashback system for poor families to balance the uniform tax rate over basic goods, such as food, and basic services, such as education and health. PAC 46 is not supported by the government and does not propose the extinction of the current taxes. It proposes the substitution of 27 ICMS member state laws and the more than 5,000 ISS municipal law for a unique national law. Member states and municipalities will keep their full autonomy. The range of rates will be set by the national law, and each member state and municipality will legislate over the preferred rate. Both PAC 45 and 110 adopt the principle of destination for taxation and allow for a deduction of tax at each stage of the production and distribution chain. As a rule, both proposals do not admit tax benefits or preferential regimes. PAC 45 previews 12-year transition rules for the current regime as a special measure, as PAC 110 makes an exception and allow preferential regimes set in the federal constitution as exception. PAC 46 does not allow tax benefits or preferential regimes for ISS, which is the municipal level tax, and leave for the national law to define whether admit or not these special treatments for ICMS. Overall, PEC 45 proposes the improvement of the current regimes, but not the complete change. Regarding the management of the IBS, PEC 45 proposes the sharing of the management of the tax, which details will be set in the legislation. PEC 110, on the other hand, proposes the creation of a federative council within each member state will have one vote. PEC 46 previews the constitution of two committees, one for ICMS, other for ISS. And I believe that the main problems that the government is finding in approve the proposals, considering the other entities, the municipalities and member states, is because it's not very clear how the management or the sharing of powers in this new configuration of one single tax will work. Both proposals, they preview transition rules. PEC 45 previews a 6 year of transition, and PEC 110, 7 years of transition. PEC 46 does not need a transition because it's not changing the taxing powers of the federative entities. Now I want to talk about the challenges for passing the reform. What are the main challenges popping up in the discussions? On one hand, the discountment of economic sectors, which sustain the new model, will increase taxation over services, agricultural products, and retail sector. Plus, there is some discussion about the preferential regime of Manaus Free Trade Zone. Those are discussions that the government is trying to address and to redraft the proposal in the parliament. The parliament is dealing with it now to make a new proposition and try to converge the interests of the sectors into the new law. On the other hand, the government, the parliament are facing the fear of the federal entities and transferring too much power to the federal government, to the federal union. And so the platform that these contents are using for expressing their different views are the medias, plus the hearings at the Tax Reform Committee in the lower chamber of the parliament. What I think, if we could resume all the points that I made about the challenges and the differences in the proposals, the missing point would be trust. There's a lack of trust among the economic sectors. There's a lack of trust among the federal entities. I researched on the European Commission political strategy for shifting powers from the member states towards the Union. I believe that the tax reform on consumption in Brazil is facing the same challenges the European Commission was facing on the EU tax law making process for direct taxation, which is the need to identify the main actors in the process, to map their interests, and design narratives to accommodate these interests. These actions are more consistent in the European Union. The findings of the research was that these actions were more consistent when addressed into institutional and policy groups. Policy groups are spaces for meeting, getting to know each other, to negotiate, and to build trust among the actors. In the EU direct taxation experience, researchers have identified 3 platforms, 3 policy groups for gathering actors and building trust. The first one was the Code of Conduct group composed of member states and the European Commission. The common interest was to tackle tax competition. This was the narrative of the group. Some of the results produced by this group was the decision to exchange tax rulings among European countries that then expanded to the OECD G20 BEPS project model. And the second outcome from this group, considering the European Union environment, was the common EU blacklist. The second group to appear was the Transfer Pricing Forum, reuniting member states and businesses. The main interests of the group was to avoid double taxation. The result so far is towards a common approach to the transfer pricing practices inside the Union. The third group, which is the more recent from 2009 on, is the Platform for Tax Good Governance, where member states, businesses, and civil society meet to create content for the narrative of a fair and a simple taxation. The discussions in the platform accelerated the approval of the ETAD directives by the Council of European Union, and also supported the drafting of the triple CTB directive proposals. I would like to bring this research from the European Union and question if there is room for this kind of initiatives of tax policy groups in Brazil. So I consider this some kind of food for thought. I don't have a complete and firm position about this is the way we should follow in Brazil, but it seems that it's a path that we could explore in order to facilitate the approval of tax reforms here. So I divide the approach for now in the tax reform on consumption, and which could follow a model like the Code of Conduct group, reuniting union and member states and business under invitation, and a platform for tax good governance to address corporate tax reform, where the Ministry of Finance, business, and civil society could meet to discuss their ideas, their interests, and problems and solutions. I consider that the institutionalization of policy groups are the most adequate model for long-term and complex tax reforms, because it has a permanent base. There are agreed rules of procedures. There is a coordination of the Ministry of Finance, which has the technical and the political approach. We could involve the parliament in the process before presenting the law to the parliament, and we could develop negotiation techniques and maybe find agreements in a more transparent way than the way it's being done today. I'm going to wrap up my presentation. Invoking the powers of the multiverse to help us in the process of the drafting and approving the tax reforms in Brazil, because I believe we need much more than technical and political skills to make the proposal pass in the parliament. We need more debate. We need to build trust among actors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. I love how the ability you have to use research and the empathy you have with other perspectives. Really appreciate it. With
Thank
that,
you.
I think we move to now a different set of eyes and perspectives with Professor Ricardo. Ricardo, you have the floor.
So, good morning in Brazil for everybody. Good afternoon for people in London. And first, I'd like to start off thanking for the invitation in the person of my friend Fabio Gaspar. Thank you a lot for the name of everybody from Great Britain Chamber, Brazilian Chamber for Great Britain. And I have also a presentation. I'd like also to thank everybody that's joining us and people that will watch the video after. I have a presentation. I try to make it happen here. Are you listening? Well, okay.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes, your screen is coming up in this side of the ocean, at least. Ricardo.
Yes, but it's wrong. It's a word. Can you see now?
Still coming up. Yeah, it's on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can
If you
see
could,
it.
if you could maximize and put on full screen, I think it would be best. Yeah,
Better?
perfect.
Perfect now.
So,
Very
well,
good.
I think I have only 15 minutes to try to discuss this complex theme. So tax reform in Brazil, it's a huge issue, many questions, many problems, and I'll try to address from municipal perspective some questions, some issues that I think that should be discussed in this whole process. I got a little bit worried when Giovanna. I'd like to thank Giovanna that helped me a lot to contextualize the proposals and what they are trying to what they are presenting to solve Brazilian tax problems. But I got a little bit worried when she showed that sticker concerning the players, the stakeholders, and municipalities that we had a soldier in a green olive uniform. So I thought that it was supposed to come here today with a green olive uniform from the army to fight. But well, I would like to address some serious questions concerning those two first proposal, the bill 110 and 45 that are being supported by the government, by the current federal government. So the first thing for me that it's important is to dispel some myths, because people always say that during the last 50 or 60 years or 30 years, we had no tax reform in Brazil. It's not true. It's not true. We had many modifications in our system with structural impact. I'd like to address them at first. And after, I would like also to analyze some aspects of these proposals and the bill that's being supported by the municipalities, Brazilian municipalities, that is the number 46 presented last year in the Senate by the Senator Ariovisto Guimarães, the PEC 46, PEC 46, 2022, and after some conclusions in this. So some opinions that make us think about Brazil. We need diagnosis. We don't have data. We don't collect data. We don't are realistic to the facts. So some perspectives are really poor about what's really happening in Brazil. And I always like to remember this first sentence from Fernando Penteado Cardoso, that is, Brazil is a country in which people think a lot, observe little, and measure practically nothing. So I think that we have to research more and analyze and measure much more than we are measuring. I know that we have a lack of information, of the data, and this is the first critic that I think that we should address in this discussion. Economic data and projections that are being presented in the working group of the House. I know Brazil is a country, we love football, we love soccer, so everybody wants to kick and reach the goal, but we're doing a lot of kicks during this whole discussion. So we during the last 40 or at least 20 years, we had many and different important tax reforms. And the first was the ICMS, the state VAT on goods. Brazil was pioneer. They are selling VAT to Brazil now as if it was something new. It's not new. We were the first, one of the first countries in the world to adopt VAT. And during all this last 60 years, we tried to avoid, we struggled against the problems of non-cumulative tax. So what happened with ICMS? That it's our biggest VAT in Brazil. We just gave up. And the most important change was to introduce the tax substitution, or the taxpayer was replaced by another person, generally the supplier, and to be the responsible to pay the taxes. So this is important. This is really important, because when we analyze the countries that adopted VAT recently that could be compared to Brazil, like India or Canada, they have problems with frauds, with carousel fraud, with tax evasion, and all kinds of frauds. So we have to understand what we have already, this experience in Brazil. It's not new, as they are saying, and trying to sell a VAT 4.0, 4.0, that it's functioning, working well in New Zealand. New Zealand is a beautiful country, beautiful people, but that has more sheep than inhabitants, and it's a level of equality, economic, social, and cultural equality that couldn't be compared to Brazil. we analyze what's happening in India. India used to have 17 different taxes. It's not the case of Brazil. Brazil has, indeed, we have the municipal tax on services, the VAT from this for the states on goods, the VAT, the federal VAT for industrial products. It's almost abandoned, became an excise during the last 30 years. And we have the PIS/COFINS. That's the same thing. They are not two taxes. It's the same thing. You just change the code to pay when you have to collect the tax at the end of the month or the end of the trimester. So it's not the case of India. And India is having big problems, serious problems with VAT recently implemented in that country. So we have to analyze our experience with ICMS. That was a big tax reform during the last 30 years. Another one, the creation and the introduction of non-cumulativity. The PIS/COFINS became non-cumulative. And so almost 70%, now it's around 50% of cases in the Administrative Council of Tax Procedures to review the tax assessment. 50% are discussions of this kind of change that was introduced in 2002 and 2003. So we have problems with non-cumulative systems. I know that they are trying to solve, and I'll talk about this in the next slides. So we had indeed a rate increase. This is now the biggest federal tax in Brazil, because income tax is the revenue of income tax is shared with municipalities and states. So this tax is not shared with the other levels of our federation. Another big change in Brazil, that was the biggest reform. We implemented a single tax. So now 89% of the companies in the country are in the Simples Nacional. So and we don't. And what's happening with Simples Nacional? That this experience should be studied, should be investigated to understand what could happen with implement this IBS, this single VAT, federal VAT, because the structures to inspect is through a committee shared with representatives from municipalities, states and the federal government. It's not working. It's not working. We have a problem of state tax waiver, formal in the budget, in the federal budget of around 120 billion a year. If you consider the state tax waiver, is much more. And the tax evasion, because we developed in Brazil a system that are fostering small micro companies, and you don't have any kind of requirements to simply extinguish this company. So that's why every year we create 2 million new companies in Brazil. It's indeed 2 new formal companies. The activity is the same. The enterprise is the same, but they adopt a new registration before the federal tax agency and before the Board of Trade, just to avoid taxation. So the tax evasion is really high. I calculate, but I estimate around 2 trillion reais during this last 10 years. So it's really important. We're not discussing what was going to happen with the Simples Nacional, we will keep this system working. It's not being discussed. We are discussing only if the companies that are in this regime will will transfer credits to the as a supplier to the buyers, to the next company in the circulation current. So it's also, we have to understand this. I have to spend time at saying that, and saying that the municipal VAT for service was the most efficient reform in the period. Lowered the rates to a maximum of 5%, increased revenue for the municipality, organized the system for inspection. We have now technology. We're not discussing technology. We think that the problem is a juridical problem, a normative problem, a legislative problem. And to face the digital economy, we have to bring technological solutions, digital solutions for inspection. So you know already the three main proposals that were presented by Giovanna. I won't spend time explaining. Just stressing one thing. That's why the banks are so interested in supporting this two first bills, is that they dream to extinguish the IOF. IOF is the tax over financial operations. It's a regulatory tax. It's not a tax to collect. But some professors understand that IOF is tax over consumption, but it's not. Well, that's why there's, in my view, supporting so much the fusion of 45 and 110 bills proposals that are being discussed in the House in Brasilia. So what's the main problems? And I'm trying to discover virtues. But first, the data calculations, economic and financial projections are unrealistic and have been refuted by serious studies by different economists such Márcio Holland, Paulo Rabelo, and José Roberto Afonso, and among others. The damage to tax autonomy of large and medium-sized municipalities. It's a violation, clear violation of a constitutional stony clause of Brazilian federalism. And the transference of revenue does not solve the problem, given the experience of resource capture and political control of these intergovernmental transference mechanisms during last decades. So it's important to understand this experience, what had been happening during the last decades concerning states and municipality, federal governments, and municipalities in Brazil. Because municipalities in Brazil are the entities that really deliver public services to the citizens. So we have a big risk of losing the capacity not only to finance, but to deliver services to the citizens. The states in Brazil are broken, you know. So that's why they are so interested in taking the municipal VAT over services, but without a system, understood system, discussed and planned system to inspect, to collect, to facilitate the life of the taxpayers, to the Brazilian companies, to reduce the number of hours that in each study of doing business in Brazil, the number of hours in Brazil to compliance, to pay tax, to comply with tax obligations is really high, and we are not addressing this issue in those two proposals that are supported now by the current federal government. We have also problems concerning the increase in the tax burden, not only for the taxpayers, to the economy, to the companies, to the Brazilian society, but also for the municipalities. Municipalities are major consumers of goods and services. So the estimated impact is more than 65 billion per year if the tax rate is 25, because 25 is the minimum, it's the floor. It's estimated the Ministry of Economy of the last government had studies showing that it will be probably more than 30%. So it's really a big problem that is not being discussed. We're going to create immunity as a actual taxpayer, the municipality of this or the states. It's a problem that we have to discuss, I think, because the impact is really huge. The non-cumulative trade-off. So the credit model, if it's adopted, we will have the problems of frauds, the problem of that tax gap that we are observing in several different countries that reach more than 35%. Or if, as after discussing with Bernardo P and people from CECIF, they created this solution. Choose your supplier. How? You have to first verify the payments, the previous payments in the system by the supplier of the VAT. If the supplier did not pay the VAT, you won't be able to take this credit to when calculating the tax you have to pay, you have to collect. So this is a problem, because which companies will be capable of paying regularly with no problems of no economical problems, financial problems? Only big companies. So this solutions, in my vision, tend to create economic concentration in Brazil. So this is also a big problem. It just appeared suddenly in the discussion. No, we will have solved the problem of tax gap, fraud, carousel, tax evasion that is common in all non-cumulative systems, on VAT systems, regimes requiring the previous tax collection. But what are the consequences? We're not discussing. And some people are saying that this proposal are mature to be approved by the Brazilian Congress. I really doubt. So the bill that is being supported by the municipalities, it's really simple. We solve the main current legislative problems that have been solved concerning, for example, the municipal VAT for services. We were very successful in extinguishing the tax war between municipalities, and even with states, with the national legislation that were confirmed by the Supreme Court during the last 3-4 years. The Supreme Court lasted too much to decide, but during the last 3-4 years, affirmed that the legislation, lei complementar, that is a national legislation, resolved and prevented the conflicts between states and municipality, and even with the federal government. So but the 46 is solving the problems that remain, and also simplifying tax obligations, duties, and liabilities. This is the most important thing to companies in Brazil, to make it easier, to make it cheaper than it's being today. And well, it's also important to preserve the 3 levels of autonomy and tax revenue levels with no increase on tax burdens. So it's really simple. We can take a further step to improve our system, and now, because the other proposals, you have a transition time of 7, 10 years at least to, and during this period, you have to deal and accomplish with all obligations of this bad system and this new system that you don't know what it is, what it will be. So it's really at least curious how people are saying that it's good for the country. We're gonna lose another opportunity of growth, I think. So to finish, to end my presentation, some conclusions. We need to overcome disinformation. This is a really a real problem in Brazil in all the areas. We have to discuss the tax injustice, not only addressing solutions for tax consumption. We have to discuss property, wealth taxation, income taxation together, because you have it's a line, a crossing line, going through all these different pillars of taxation, because it's a system. It's not separated. You can't understand and discuss and develop solutions considering only tax consumption. And we have to remember that Brazil, in the rank of inequality, is the third in the inequality of wealth. It's the 9th of income, but it's the third. We only lose to Sultanate of Brunei and Eswatini, the old Swazilandia. So it's we have to discuss our tax system as a whole thing. The failures of VAT that I addressed already, the problem of the tax burden increase, high impact, that will be a high impact also for municipalities, for the services sector, for the agro sector also. The difficulties, the inability to calculate, the lack of design of mechanism to implement the new tools, the problem of this management committee that will realize the inspections and establish and enforce the new system that we don't know what's the proposal is. Indeed, the destruction of municipal autonomy, especially the front of the big and medium municipalities in Brazil. To finish, I would like to show, I don't know if I have my more minutes, this well, it's not running the video, but I always remember this movie by Brazil, when a magician came, and it's very looks like Bernard Api. It's the actor José Wilker, and he's running the country, presenting his magician presentations, and he's saying that he can fulfill the main Brazilians' desires from people of Brazil. And people say something to him, well, prosperity, to be immortal, but he say that he can't do that, but he can do one thing that everybody in Brazil would like to have. So Brazil will be a civilized, will be comparing, admitted to do OECD, is to bring snow to Brazil. So if you change snow to VAT, you can understand how this proposal are trying to make Brazil a civilized country, to be a country of first level, to be admitted in the OECD. It's not doing only or copying and pasting foreign models that will solve the serious Brazilian problems. We have to understand, to discuss, and to address, to create intelligent, specific, and efficient solutions for a good tax reform. I thank you for following me in this discussion, and I think I stopped my presentation and ended, and thank you again, Fabio, and everybody for listening to the municipalities about this very important issue that it's tax reform in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Let me suggest that you share the link of the video you were trying to play in the chat box, so we can watch it later and understand the analogy. Thank you very much. I think you represent a big share of the Federation, so really appreciate your views. And with that, I think we are ready to listen to maybe the other side of the table with Daniel Loria. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone in the UK. Fabio, how much time do I have?
15,
I thought we had
15
minutes.
Yeah, 15, 20 minutes. I think I'm monitoring timing. It should be good. If we stick to it, we should still have a few minutes for Q&A.
Okay, I'll try to keep to my limited time here to the benefit of my colleagues. So good morning, everyone, again, and good afternoon to you all in the UK. First of all, an introduction. My name is Daniel Loria. I'm a director at the Secretariat for Tax Reform at the Ministry of Finance. I was invited by Bernard Api for this role here in the ministry. I have been working for the private sector for around 20 years before assuming this position here in the Secretariat. My main role in the Secretariat is to lead the discussions on corporate income tax and personal income tax reform. And I am also following, of course, VAT reform. So I am in a position to talk about this as well. Giovanna, thank you for your comments on corporate tax governance. This is something that has been on my mind. I'm new in the government. So this is something that's really intriguing to me. How can we build trust with all the participants on the table and facilitate discussions on what's best for Brazil? And having this position as the government, it's also very interesting for the first time in my life, actually, to be really thinking about the public interest and the best interest of Brazil as a whole, and not of any specific entity or city or company or sector or whatever. So we really try to think abstractly about the best interests of Brazil. And thank you, Ricardo, for bringing to the table the position of the large municipalities as well. So I'm going to begin, and also thank you, Giovanna, for the overview. This is going to save some time. So I'm going to begin with the strategy that this federal government is adopting for tax reform. The federal government strategically since before the government began, so in the transition period last year, a strategic decision was made to split the discussion on tax reform in two stages: VAT reform and income tax reform. VAT reform is the reform that's really being discussed in Brazil for more time. So we have discussions at the parliament for many, many years. And we had two proposed amendments to the federal constitution that were already in the parliament. PEC 110 in the Senate, PEC 110 in the Senate, and PEC 45, PEC 45 at the House of Representatives. Since this project has been discussed for at least 3 years in the Senate and the House, and has been extensively discussed as well in the universities, the government decided to advance with it first. In addition to that, the potential benefits that can be obtained through this project, I'm going to go over them here today, are significant. So there was really no reason to wait for the income tax project to be mature before advancing with the VAT reform. So that's why the government is pushing for VAT reform now. The House has organized a working group who has been working for several weeks now, several public hearings. If I'm not mistaken, my colleagues here online were present at one or more of these public hearings, and they're doing a great job in really hearing everyone who has to have a voice in this discussion. A report is expected to be released soon by the rapporteur, Deputado Aguinaldo Ribeiro. After the report, we should see a draft from the rapporteur and the vote at the plenary session of the House. We're expecting a vote before mid-July, so by mid-July, which is when the House takes a break. And if that really happens, then the Senate may begin its analysis in Q3 of this year. Income tax, in turn, was initially planned to be presented as a bill of law after VAT reform was approved. So, for example, in Q4 2023, I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons why we anticipated a piece of the income tax reform a little bit further along the presentation. Okay, so starting with VAT, and like Ricardo said, we are eager for the diagnosis of the problems in Brazil. And I was talking to Professor Everardo Maciel the other day, and he's also very keen on identification of the problems that we want to solve. And when it comes to VAT in Brazil, I think that we have a lot of problems that we want to solve. So we have an overly complex indirect tax system. We know about that. In addition to the 27 states and 5,000 municipalities with different legislations. So, excuse me, just. Sorry. So we have an overly complex indirect tax system. In addition to the 50 state, to the 5,000 municipalities, more or less, and 27 states, within each state, we have many exceptions and many different tax treatments, either in the regulations of the state or in special tax regimes that can be negotiated on a one-on-one basis with the states. There's an extremely high cost of tax compliance for companies. I think this is also obvious for everyone online, at least anyone who deals with taxes in Brazil and paying taxes in Brazil. We had the doing business research in the past, and it was we stopped. I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers who did it. They stopped doing it, but Brazil was always in the last positions in terms of how many hours were needed to pay taxes in Brazil, which is really a shame for our country. We have excessive tax litigation, and we have a lack of legal certainty in relation to tax benefits, their tax treatment, the federal income tax treatment on that. We have something that's really, important for companies, which is a lack of transparency in the competitive arena. So companies really don't know how much their competitors are paying in taxes. This is especially true in the case of the state VAT. Tax becomes an edge or a competitive advantage, which really distorts the market. And together with that, what we've been discussing with the states who are in favor of the reform, the states are really engaged in a race to the bottom situation in which one state provides a specific tax benefit, and then the other state has to plan a countermeasure to keep a company in their state. So we have a colleague who worked for the state of Minas Gerais, for example, and he told us that at some point in his career, his mission was to provide countermeasures to keep companies in the state because other states were trying to captivate these companies to move over there. So the countermeasures were usually providing better tax benefits for the companies in that state. So really what this shows is that providing state tax benefits really doesn't attract companies in practice anymore. It's an inefficient way of attracting companies to different regions. Obviously, due to these tax benefits, there's an inefficient allocation of resources in Brazil. We have companies with distribution centers that are located 2,000 kilometers from their consumers. We have trucks going around. Fabio was talking about ESG a lot in the beginning. So we have our tax system motivates trucks to move around Brazil in order for the company to be able to enable to unlock a specific tax benefit. So I'm from São Paulo. Here in São Paulo, we have a very common tax planning strategy involving producing in São Paulo, distributing to a different state, and then bringing it back to the consumers in São Paulo. Imagine all of the environmental impacts of that. So we don't talk about that a lot or enough, basically, maybe, but it really is a shame for the country. At least I am really ashamed of having a tax system that forces companies to do that to obtain a tax advantage. It's legal, it's, companies have to do it, but I'm really ashamed of a country that enables this and leads company to try to organize its activities in a very inefficient way only to obtain a tax advantage. Obviously, this environment discourages investment, it harms the business environment, and it harms economic growth at the end of the day. It harms especially our productivity here in Brazil. Giovanna talked a lot about the convergence between the two PECs, 110 and 45, what they have in common, basically. I cherry-picked here a few items to discuss with you all. I think those items are more interesting for companies. So basically, the overview here is we want to substitute 5 taxes, PIS/COFINS, ICMS, ISS, and IPI for 1 or 2 value-added taxes, which is the IVA or VAT. 1 or 2 because we have in PEC 45 a single VAT nationwide, managed by the federal union, and in PEC 110 we have a dual VAT, a national federal one and a local one, which is shared by the state and municipalities. Both are under discussion at the working group at the House of Representatives. In addition to that, we're going to have an excise tax on items with negative impacts, which also has an ESG slant here because this is a taxation on products with negative externalities, such as the most famous ones that people always quote, alcoholic beverages, cigarettes, and those types of products, which already have higher taxes in Brazil. So in both proposals, the Brazilian VAT bears the characteristics of the best modern VATs adopted by over 170 countries around the globe, VATs in general. I would say that the main characteristic is a broad base. So Brazil is really the only country that segregates between taxation of merchandise or goods, which is currently under the scope of ICMS at the state level, and services, which is under the scope of the municipalities. This segregation is problematic because we leave a huge gray area in the middle, such as leases, intangibles, digital economy, which is really not in the scope of neither tax. And we also create all sorts of arbitrations between how do I treat a specific type of activity. So the other day, someone sent a picture of, I think it was a truck, which said that we provide the lease of balloons for birthdays. So we're like, so now people are leasing balloons instead of selling balloons with the helium gas and all that, because the lease doesn't pay taxes, but the sale does. So this creates all types of distortions and arbitration possibilities, which are harmful for the economy, for the tax administration, and at the end of the day, generate a lot of legal uncertainty. So the VAT, second point, must be fully non-cumulative. So the tax credit must be based on the payment of the input invoice. Ricardo raised the concern with how this credit is going to be calculated. This is being discussed. Obviously, this is a concern, and in order for VAT to work, it must be non-cumulative. If people have problems with the tax credit, the VAT is broken. And obviously, the federal government would not propose something that would be broken from inception. So there's a possibility of a split payment. There's a possibility of a credit based on the payment of the invoice. The House is discussing these possibilities. Destination-based taxation. So what this means is that tax is not paid anymore in the origin of the production, but rather in the state and municipality where the consumer consumes this product or service. This enhances tax citizenship, and municipalities will be able to have a dialogue directly with its constituents, the people living there, really, on how its consumption is taxed there. So now a person in Rio, for example, when it buys a product, the tax will not go to a different state or wherever. He doesn't know where it's going to go. It's going to go to Rio. The tax will not levy on exports. What this means is that if a given sector, for example, an agricultural company, if that agricultural company is an exporter, it's going to have it inside Brazil, it pays VAT, but once it exports, it's going to have an immediate refund of this VAT. This type of refund will not depend on political or public finances restrictions. The rationale that's being built is that there's going to be a bank account where the money is deposited. It doesn't go to the budget of the states and municipalities in order to leave later on, because it would be a risk of becoming a precatório, right? A long-term payment. So the idea is that the money is kept in this bank account until the final consumption occurs. And if the final consumer is outside Brazil, if it's an export, then that amount of that VAT is going to be allocated directly to the company. And no public restrictions, no political concerns on that. The same is also valid for allocations between federal, states, and municipalities, but I'm going to leave that discussion for a different day. One more big benefit from the reform is that the investments are also fully creditable upfront. So now we are in the current regime. We have problems with accrual of credits. A bunch of companies have a lot of credits accumulated, especially exporters. So people can't, use these credits, can't monetize these credits. So now in the exports, you're going to have the credit upfront, and in the investments, which the credit is currently long term, it's going to have an upfront immediate recovery. So this is a significant improvement and incentive for CapEx and investments in general. Single nationwide legislation, even in the dual VAT, meaning that the company won't have to deal with 5,000 legislations plus 27 plus thousands within the state, but rather with a single legislation. Even if it's a dual VAT, it's going to be the same legislation governing both VATs. Levies on the sale price, so fully transparent. And the idea is to have a simple operational system. These are the main features. There's going to be explicit provision saying that the tax burden on consumption cannot be increased. I don't know why this keeps coming up in the discussion, but the tax burden on consumption will not be increased. This is going to be in the federal constitution. The problem is that the current taxation on consumption is messy, we don't see it, and it's big. So when we say that the overall tax burden on consumption will not be increased, this means that we're going to have a reference rate of the VAT that's going to be calculated based on whatever the tax burden is already in Brazil. So our problem is the current situation, not the tax reform. Autonomy of states and municipalities is a long discussion, but I think that the main points here are two. One is that states and municipalities, whoops, it's here, and municipalities will keep the possibility of having specific rates as long as those rates apply to all of the consumers in those locations. And for the companies, there's going to be a single tax administration agency with shared governance, meaning a single interface for companies. So companies that have to interact with tax administrations in the 27 states, 5,000 municipalities, and the federal level will now only interact with a single tax administration. There's a lot of technical matters around the formation of that. In terms of how to allocate the tax burden between the different sectors, there's been discussion on or requests basically of low rates or tax exemptions. Possible models are being studied. The main feature here is that when we have lower rates or tax exemptions, we benefit all of the consumers of those products and services. So for example, if I go to the market and buy rice, and I have 3 kids, I buy a lot of rice, and I'm not a targeted person of the I'm at the top of the income distribution pyramid in Brazil, I benefit from a lower rate or a tax exemption. And I shouldn't benefit from it, basically. So the alternative that we're building within the government is the cashback for VAT, the cashback of VAT for families, not necessarily only low-income families. There's a group dedicated to this to try to build a cashback mechanism that can even benefit perhaps medium-income families. And this is, in our view, much better use for public money than having lower rates or tax exemptions that benefit everyone, including rich families. Tax credits accumulated in the old regime are going to be refunded. Both packs have a provision for that. This is under discussion. This is a point that's really important for the companies. The government is aware of that. And the way is not defined yet. There is this possibility of the 20-year refund updated by Selic. This is a real problem of the current system that must be addressed in the transition. Talking about transition, we have 2 transitions. So we have a transition for public finances that's not apparent to the public, that companies and consumers don't see this. They're not involved in this. This is related to the split between the resources between the federal union, the states, municipalities. And a bunch of people are working on this for a long period so that growth kicks in and benefits everyone. Obviously, different municipalities and different states have different impacts, naturally, but people are really focused on this and trying to minimize negative impacts for the different entities. And for companies and consumers, the idea is to have a shorter transition period. Obviously, we're going to know what the VAT is. Once that transition period is in place, we'll know where we're going to get. And this is also being discussed. It's a little bit tricky because the shorter it is, the better for companies, but we face a higher risk of making mistakes, right? So the reform basically mitigates substantially the main problems of the VAT that I was talking about, where companies are going to be able to better organize their activities, taxes are going to be more transparent. We're not going to have these what we call tax residues within the productive chain, and we're going to have a significant reduction in tax compliance costs. We have a bunch of data here, and I have a website with the data that can be accessed later on by you all. Unfortunately, the website is in Portuguese. We still don't have it in English, except for this presentation. But there's a bunch of data here. So we have, and all of this has sources. Okay, so you can see the sources later on. So the most conservative scenario that we have is that we're going to have an increase of at least 12% on our GDP or more in 15 years. Additionally to the baseline economic growth that we would have due to the tax reform. All sectors would benefit according to the calculations that are available on the website. Differently, of course, but all of them would benefit. Just a comment here, the working group is discussing different tax treatment for certain sectors to enable approval of the reform. There's nothing defined on that point yet. Basically, the discussion is between the rates or the cashback system, but a differentiated tax system for certain sectors will probably be suggested, be proposed by the House. What we hear is education and health as the main sectors that are going to have some sort of differentiated tax treatment. Perhaps small producers for agriculture, perhaps public transportation. Let's see. In terms of municipalities, what we have is a situation in Brazil in which we have very poor municipalities in terms of public revenues and very rich municipalities in terms of public revenue per capita. And the PEC is going to reduce this inequality between municipalities as well. Increase to the purchase capacity of the population, especially the lower income population. Again, here, a variation of available income for families. And last, I said that I would not, exceed my time, but obviously I did, and sorry for that, everyone. But last, in terms of income tax, what we have is we have guidelines. So we're working for a fairer and more efficient income tax system. We have these guidelines, which are basically universal, but they're important to point out anyway. So we are looking for a progressive income tax system with increasing rates based on increasing incomes on a personal level, equality, so the same tax treatment for those in equivalent situations, neutrality, meaning less interference of taxes in the organization of the economic activities, and this dialogues well with the VAT reform. International competitiveness, so obviously we want Brazil to be competitive in terms of attraction of foreign investment and for our companies to be competitive as well when they expand overseas. So we're hopefully going to see measures along these lines in the upcoming months. And legal certainty, of course, which is always desirable, the reduction of tax litigation and transition rules. I'm leaving the website with more information. Like I said, the website is in Portuguese, so apologies for that. And I'd like to thank everyone. And just to answer Giovanna's point, Fabio, on why we pushed for the provisional measure now for the CFC on individuals. Giovanna, it was much more of a political matter than anything else. The president basically had promised the increase to 2 minimum wages of the exemption for the personal income tax. And within the Ministry of Finance, we had to locate a source of income to fund that expansion in the exemption of the personal income tax. We looked at several possibilities, and the one that was defined within the government to be better fit for this specific situation was the CFC for individuals. It's a personal income tax matter. It only applies to individuals. It's recommended by the OECD, adopted by America, UK, Latin America, Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was something that was what we like to call low-hanging fruit that we, collected from the tree and pushed it forward. But I will be happy to discuss in more detail with you all. Sorry again for exceeding my time, but I wanted to cover everything. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think so maybe first of all, as a suggestion, if you can copy and paste the website you were making reference to in the text box, I think that will benefit everyone. Secondly, one of the downsides of managing and entertaining a discussion so rich and interesting and important as this one is that it's really, really hard to stick to the allotted time. So that's the downside. The upside,
Sorry for that.
I think, is that, no, don't worry, it's not only on you. But I was going to move to the upside, which is because it's so interesting and important, I think the audience will bear with us when I ask for some additional minutes so that we allow Guilherme to have his full time.
Okay, can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, Guilherme. Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to start saying that I have a friend who says that Brazil is a tax haven, but not for taxpayers, only for tax lawyers and tax advisors, which is not good for the country at all. So it's just a joke that I always like to remember. I brought here some quick context to you. Let me just. So just some comparison to show where we are in terms of tax environment and why the reform is so important for the country. So this graphic shows that Brazil depends a lot on revenues arising from the indirect taxes or the tax on consumption. In Brazil, indirect taxes represent 44% of all government revenues, while in OECD countries, it's around 33%. Income taxes represent 22% of the Brazilian government revenues, while in OECD countries, it's again around 33%. So the first conclusion that we have here, we have a distortion when we compare the sources of revenues in Brazil with other countries, mainly in the OECD. Moving to the quick analysis of the income taxes, in Brazil, we have around 27.5% effective rate on the personal income tax, while the OECD average is around 42.6%. In the corporate, it's not different. Brazil has around 34% effective rate against 41.6% in the OECD countries. So, second conclusion, our income tax rates are lower than in most of the countries. On the other hand, when we go to the taxes on consumption, Brazil has a much higher tax burden. We have an average of 42% indirect tax rate against 19% in OECD countries. And the reality is that nobody really knows what is the effective burden that we have on consumption in Brazil, because we don't have a neutral system. We don't have neutrality. We don't have transparency. There are taxes that are accumulating among the supply chain. So this 42% is an average, but in certain products or sectors, it can reach more than 60%. We have a recent research. We did a research with more than 100 companies, small, medium, and high companies from all main sectors. And it's unbelievable, but it shows that big companies incurring almost 44,000 hours per year with tax compliance. So it's not like only the heavy tax burden. It's very difficult and costly to pay taxes in Brazil. And most of this time relates to taxes on consumption. And again, as my colleagues have showed, we have federal, state, and municipal levels of indirect taxes. So we have PIS, COFINS, IPI in the federal side. We have ICMS, which is the state VAT, and the ISS in the municipalities. So most of this time is represented by different tax returns, different invoices, different controls that taxpayers have to file monthly. The research shows that 76% of the participating companies are seeking for simplification. This is the main expectation with regard to the reform. And only 3% mentioned that they are concerned with the possibility of having a tax burden increase. So again, the main point here is simplification, reduction of tax compliance, reduction of tax compliance costs. So this is the main objective and the main expectation that we see in this research. And just to show some other relevant topics, most of the participating companies prefer one single federal VAT. We see that it's most likely that the PEC 110, which proposes a dual VAT model with a federal VAT and a state and municipal VAT. So this is likely to have more chances to be approved, but from a taxpayer perspective, most would prefer a single VAT in the federal level. 67% prefer the maintenance of tax incentive. And why? Probably because most of these companies are taking benefit of tax incentives. So this number shows that they are concerned with this matter. 56% understands that it's important to introduce an excise tax. This is to be introduced by both PECs for certain sectors like tobacco, alcoholic beverages, arms, and similar products. 90% are very concerned with a solution for tax credits accumulated in the current regime. We have companies with billions and billions of reais in accumulated credits, federal and state credits. They are concerned that as we migrate to the new model, there must be a solution for these credits that are credits that they cannot monetize. So this is a huge cash impact for taxpayers. And lastly, most of participating companies mentioned that the ideal transition period should be around 5 years. We see that we have discussions on 6 to 10 years. I think most of companies understand that there must be some period for transition. It will be very challenging to migrate from the current model to the new one. So they mentioned something around 5 years. Here, I brought just like, I will not repeat what my colleagues have already presented, but we have the two main proposals in the Congress. I think the main difference that I would like to point out are PEC 110 introduces two VAT. I would say that it brings more alignment between the federal union, the states, and the municipalities, and also to some sectors that have been supporting PEC 110. On the other side, one downside would be we would still have more than one VAT and not only the federal VAT as proposed in the PEC 45. And lastly, most of taxpayers are concerned with some topics of the proposals. Some sectors are concerned that they would likely have an increase on the tax burden. I don't want to mention some sectors, but there are different sectors that are concerned with this possibility. There are a lot of specificities in sectors with several differentiated regimes, with a large number of special regimes. So part of these taxpayers are concerned that there will be a huge impact when changing to the new model. We have a lot of companies based in different regions in Brazil due to the tax incentives. So they are very concerned because they have long-term plans of investment in some regions. And the tax incentives have been very important for this decision. So this is a sensitive area that they are concerned with. Also, there is a concern that with the abolishment of the tax incentives, some states or some regions could lose part of the investments. Tax litigation is always a concern in Brazil. So I think one of the main objective, and we need to be very careful with this, how to make sure that the new model will not bring litigation. We don't want more litigation. We don't want more tax litigation. So we need to be very careful to make sure that we have a strong reform in the federal constitution, well regulated by the complementary and ordinary laws to avoid what we currently have in terms of litigation. We have trillions of reais in litigation covering taxes. And lastly, the transition period. So this seems to be very difficult. So for 6 to 10 years, taxpayers will have to deal with the current model and with the new model. So how to prepare to minimize these impacts and how to make sure that we introduce the new model and we don't have problems with the tax administrations, as they will have 5 years to audit the taxpayers. So I try to be very quick to cover all my presentation here, and I would like to end saying that my feeling is it's now or never. So let's make this happen. I think this is very important for the country that we have like these reforms approved. Thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Guilherme. Very good and important insights. And sounds like it was a very good closing and momentum since we started with Giovanna and Ricardo and Danielle and then yourself. It sounds like it was planned, but it was. So anyway, given the fact we are behind schedule and again, excusing ourselves for it, we'll have to skip the Q&A. But given the fact that we have people who have shared their details and emails, if there's any burning question, anything that will not have been answered by the slides that we hope will be shared in the BCC website, feel free to contact yourselves. Again, thank you very much for the BBC and the person of Vera. Thank you very much for the starred panelists and for the audience for their time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
to be
Thank you
here.
very much. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.